Max has achieved 10 in a row. Not even your guys in their peak ever did that. I think the team did at one point. But anyway, you've got to take your hats off.
Yeah, I mean, our situation was maybe a little bit different because we had two guys fighting against each other within the team. I don't know whether he cares about the record. It's not something that would be important for me, any of those numbers. It's for Wikipedia, nobody reads that anyway.
Hey guys, this is a casual fan. Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes, Toto Wolff, Red Bull, Max Verstappen, and the contentious 10-race win streak. That led to a lot of debate and a lot of snarky comments from Lewis Hamilton and Toto Wolff during the Italian Grand Prix. The Italian Grand Prix weekend was an interesting one. It all started with Lewis Hamilton, first of all, starting the weekend with another plea with the FIA where he pretty much claimed that an FIA intervention to slow down Red Bull is arguably a good thing for the sport. Next up, we had Lewis Hamilton, again making headlines when he claimed that every teammate he has had in his career, they were better than what Max Verstappen has had. Well, it did not end there because ultimately, to cap off the weekend, we had Toto Wolff in a way throwing his hat in the ring when he pretty much dismissed Max Verstappen's 10-race win streak by saying that records are meant for Wikipedia and no one reads Wikipedia anyway. So yes, it was an interesting weekend where Max Verstappen stole the headline on track while Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes boss pretty much did it off the track. However, there was one thing that was something that I noticed, and I feel this is something that needs to be talked about, and that is a question that might be asked about Lewis and Toto Wolff after their somewhat strange reactions during the Italian Grand Prix. And the question is that whether the Max Verstappen record run that he's been on for the last 18 odd months, whether that run has exposed an insecure or maybe a somewhat jealous side of Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes. In this video, what we are going to do is try to answer that question. And to do that, we'll go through each of the 3 comments that have been made in the weekend and we'll see how legitimate those comments are. At the end of the video, I'll share my opinion about the whole thing. And of course, what do you guys think as well? That is the most important part. Drop your views in the comment section. Please like this video, share it with your friends. It helps the algorithm as well. So please do that. Now getting back to the video, again, let's start with the first comment from Lewis Hamilton and we'll take it from there. Now the first comment that Lewis Hamilton made was how it would be great for F1 if FIA intervened and slowed down Red Bull. Now for reference, I'll just add the link of the quote in the description. You can take a look at it. However, just to keep things brief, these were the 3 salient points that he made. The first was that if FIA intervenes and slows down Red Bull, it would be great for the sport. Secondly, the second thing he claimed was that similar interventions had been made against Mercedes as well, where Mercedes was slowed down or the attempts were made to slow down Mercedes when the team was dominating. He significantly pointed out what happened with the power mode in 2020 or what happened in 2021 when the floor regulations were changed from 2020 to 2021 to slow down Mercedes and end Mercedes domination. And finally, the third point that he made was that Lewis Hamilton has always been an advocate of close racing. He has never been in favor of single team domination, and that is not good for the sport. Now, let's break these comments down and let's see how valid these claims are. Now, in the first point, Lewis claims that if the FIA intervenes, it would ultimately make the sport better and it will be for the betterment of the sport. Now, in my view, he's right. If the FIA slow down Red Bull, we will have more competition at the front. And I don't think it's even arguable that if something like this happens, we are looking at a better season as compared to what we have in 2023. Now, the second point that he makes is where things get a bit interesting, where he claims that in 2020 and 2021, there were alterations made to the technical regulations to slow down Mercedes. Now, the 2020 alteration where the power modes were pretty much disbanded, he's right about that. That happened in 2020. But he's also ignoring a fact that the regulations had been in place since 2014. We are looking at a 7-year window where nothing was done to the power unit. The power unit, one of the major contributors to Mercedes' success, was left alone. Nothing was done. So maybe that is something that he might need to keep in mind. Now, secondly, talking about the 2021 floor regulations, I think what happened with the floor regulations and what effect it had, it would take some very, very impressive race engineer, some very, very brilliant mind to actually find out and figure out that Mercedes domination actually came from that particular part of the flow. whatever I've seen, there's no conclusive proof that the change made was specifically to slow down Mercedes. The change was essentially made because the Pirellis could not keep up with the already super fast cars. And from 2020 to 2021, a sturdier tire could not be made because of, well, there was this thing called the pandemic and the COVID-19 situation that prevented that from happening. So yeah, that was the second point. Now the third point, where Lewis claims that he has always been an advocate of closer racing. Well, it's one thing saying something and putting it out in the media that you want closer racing. The second thing is acting on it. Lewis has never acted on it. There's one thing that everyone always forgets. In 2014, when the new turbo hybrid regulations were formed, there was one significant problem with those regulations. The team that was able to nail the turbo hybrid in 2014 was always going to have an advantage. Why? Because of the token system. The token system is something similar to the cost cap we have right now, wherein the number of resources are limited that can be used for car development. In 2014, a token system was in place which prevented teams, basically the constructors, from making changes to their power units beyond a certain point. That is precisely why a team like Ferrari or a team like Renault, who built their own power units, or Honda, they could not catch up with Mercedes for all these years. And even when Ferrari did in 2018, the engine was illegal, and even that took 4 years to make it happen. If Lewis was truly an advocate of closer racing, this was the first thing that he would have abolished. He did not even advocate a change in token system. This was never on agenda. Secondly, there was a situation in 2018 where Red Bull was pretty much essentially without a power unit. It was at that point in time where, well, Red Bull approached Mercedes for a power unit and was flatly declined. In essence, it was a perfect business decision from Mercedes. However, if that had been done, then we would have had closer racing at the front. Again, Lewis, someone who actually advocates closer racing, right? He did not do anything on that front as well, as Red Bull was pretty much essentially without a power unit at the time. So yes, it's easy to make claims that you wanted this, and it is completely different story when you have to act on it. Lewis is essentially like any other driver on the F1 grid. Sure, he wants competition, but that does not mean that he will give even an inch to his competitor for them to get stronger. And that is what the bottom line is. When Lewis himself had a dominant car, he didn't do anything or didn't even advocate ending a single team domination, which, by the way, he had the power to make happen. He didn't. So that should ultimately end the debate where Lewis continues to claim that he has always been against single team domination. He hasn't. He didn't do anything from 2014 to 2020. So let's cut the crap that is not true. Finally, to put a bow on the first point, and to be honest, how damningly wrong Lewis Hamilton's claims are. Well, this question that the FIA should actually intervene to slow down Red Bull, it was put to Ferrari, it was put to McLaren, Red Bull, and Toto Wolff from Mercedes. All four of them were not in favor of an FIA intervention to slow down Red Bull. None of them, not even the Mercedes boss. So that should tell you how legitimate such a plea is. And I think that should end the argument when it comes to the first point. Now let's move to the second one. Now the second point is arguably a bit smaller. It should not take much time in the video as well. Now the second point is where Lewis Hamilton claimed that all of the teammates of his F1 career were better than what Max Verstappen has had in his career. Right, so let's first go through the quote before we try to dissect what Lewis has said. So here's what Lewis said when he was actually questioned about how Max Verstappen was dominating his teammates. Here's what he said. When I qualified half a second, 6/10 ahead of Valtteri, they didn't say the same thing as they say today when Max qualifies 6/10 ahead of Perez. It's blown up much more, and in my personal opinion, Valtteri and actually all of my teammates have been stronger than the teammates Max has had. Jenson Button, Fernando Alonso, George Russell, Valtteri, Nico, I've had so many. These guys have all been very consistent, and Max has not raced against anyone like that. Now let's get one thing straight. Lewis Hamilton is not claiming that overall he has had better teammates as compared to Max Verstappen. That is not his claim, because if that was his claim, I think I'll be the first to say that the kind of teammates that Lewis has had, they are of a much better and higher quality. However, Lewis Hamilton's statement is that all of my teammates, not the entire quality, the total quality of the teammates that I've had. He said all of my teammates, they are better than any teammate that Max Verstappen has had. Now, is that true? In my view, a Valtteri Bottas, a Heikki Kovalainen, they are not better than Daniel Ricciardo. They are just not. Right now on current form, I might even say that a Pierre Gasly, an Alex Albon, a Carlos Sainz, they are better than Valtteri Bottas and even Heikki Kovalainen. So does this claim stand? No, it does not. And that ends the second argument and brings us to a more juicy third argument. Let's get to it. Now the third argument. And in the third argument, we have Toto Wolff pretty much dismissing Max Verstappen's 10 race record. Now here's the quote from his side. When asked about Max Verstappen's 10 race win streak, here's what Toto Wolff said. Our position was different because we had two cars fighting against each other. I don't think he cares too much about records, neither do we, because I don't think anyone reads Wikipedia. Now, it was a bit dismissive, wasn't it? And it was a bit strange coming from Toto Wolff, who tends to be very gracious and he has been very complimenting of Max Verstappen and his skills. However, maybe there is a case that Toto Wolff does not regard records as anything. Maybe he looks at records as something that are not as essential and not as important. So yes, maybe that is the case. Let's try and dissect whether Toto Wolff's views about records have always been this consistent. Now to do that, let's go back a few years and let's take a look at the comments Toto Wolff made when Lewis Hamilton won his 100th race. Let's take a look at what he said. Now, after Lewis Hamilton won his 100th race in Sochi in Russia in 2021, here's what Toto Wolff said. I think we are witnesses of a career that is just amazing. That 100th race victory is just mind-blowing. Today, we talk about it, it's going to be in the news for 24 hours. But only 20 years down the line, we are going to realize we've been part of that. Now, these are the comments from Toto Wolff when he talks about Lewis Hamilton getting 100 wins. Again, when someone wins 100 races, they deserve the credit, and Lewis got his. There's nothing wrong with it. However, at the same time, it does appear that whatever comments he made about Max Verstappen and records not meaning anything to him, they just don't hold true, and that is a bit disappointing. And in my view, when he looks back at this particular clip, maybe a few days later, he will feel a bit disappointed and he will feel that maybe that was not the glorious moment of his career until now. Now that we've gone through the three comments, there is a more important part, and that part is where I'm going to share my opinion on things. Now in this part, first of all, I want to address why I feel the comments have been made by Mercedes as well as Lewis Hamilton, especially on the eve of Max Verstappen about to break the record for most consecutive race wins in F1. Let's take a look. Now first of all, there are three questions that come into my mind when I actually try to break this thing down. The first is whether Red Bull and Max Verstappen, they're probably dominating better than how Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton did. How? Well, let's talk about it. First of all, the 2022 F1 season, it wasn't entirely one on pace. The first half of the season was very close. Even the second half of the season was close in parts. However, Red Bull won on most occasions. The most important thing right now to look at, and something that might be something that has hit a nerve with Mercedes and maybe even Lewis Hamilton as well, is the fact that right now Red Bull is on a 15 race win streak. The maximum that Mercedes did at the peak of its domination was 11 races. It's not even close. And that is where I feel there's maybe a level of insecurity that might have creeped in, because let's face it, the way Red Bull is functioning right now, it is a well-oiled machine. Every race it has to fight hard to secure pole position. Many times Max Verstappen has even lost out now. However, still the team makes the most of the car, and even the strategy unit and other parts of the team play their role. And the records are there for all to see. They are on a 15 race win streak. And of course, Singapore is going to be very challenging because the slow speed sections is not Red Bull's forte right now. But will Red Bull be the favorite to win? Of course it will be. So yes, if you take a look at it on those fronts, it does appear that the fact that Red Bull and Max Verstappen are actually dominating better than how Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton used to, it might have struck a nerve. Next up, I feel the Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen battle has a role to play as well, because in the last year and a half, Max Verstappen has been on a record-breaking run. Last season, he won the most races that a driver has won in a single season. He beat the record that was held by Sebastian Vettel and Michael Schumacher. In that particular record, Lewis Hamilton was not on top. He only had 11 wins, while Max Verstappen bettered the record by winning 15. Again, a very impressive feat. And again, something that Lewis had been unable to do. The second feat that might have even hurt a bit more was the fact that Max Verstappen bettered Lewis Hamilton's record for most points in a season. Lewis had 413 points, while Max Verstappen ended the 2021 F1 season with 454 points. And by the way, this gets even more impressive if you take into consideration that Max had 2 DNFs in the first 4 races. And if you look at Lewis Hamilton's season in 2019, mind you, where there was only 1 less race, he did not have any DNF. Finally, now talking about the record for most consecutive race wins, and well, Max Verstappen has totally blown Lewis Hamilton out of the water. Max is currently at 10, while the best for Lewis was only 5, and that is significantly lower. So yes, maybe that might have been a bit of a needle, and maybe that actually is something that led to the kind of outburst that Lewis had, where he tried to point out the kind of teammates that Max Verstappen has had in his career. Finally, in all of this, what ultimately comes down to is the Red Bull versus Mercedes debate. Now, in my view, what hurt and what actually elicited the kind of reaction from Toto Wolff was, well, it was primarily the kind of race that Mercedes had in Monza. Mercedes was nowhere close to Red Bull, and it was even nowhere close to Ferrari as well. And that is probably something that hurt Toto Wolff a bit more, and that led to the kind of reaction. The man has seen his team dominate for close to a decade and be competitive for the most part. This time around, the team not even being able to get a podium is something that probably hurt him. And maybe that was what was reflective in the kind of interview that he gave as well. Finally, now when we've covered each and everything, I think it's about time we answer the question. Did Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton sound a bit insecure? The answer to that question, in my view, is yes. They did sound a bit insecure. And the insecurity, in my view, it rose from the kind of dominance that Red Bull has had. And it rose from the kind of dominance that Max Verstappen has had. Because a 10-race win streak, it takes a lot of effort. And in the eyes of many, is probably taken the way Lewis Hamilton used to dominate and taken it a step further and made it even better. And that is where maybe Lewis might be feeling a bit left out, and maybe he tried to talk about how he was in his glory days, and it did not look good. In my view, the comments that Lewis made and the comments that Toto Wolff has made, they do sound a bit bitter. And maybe right now, a few days later, since they made these comments, maybe a week or so later as well, you might see both of them looking back at the way they were commenting and maybe regret that the kind of language that they used and the lack of grace that was there in how they actually acted in the situation. Now coming to the main part, should they be insecure? Should a Lewis Hamilton or a Toto Wolff be insecure by the achievements of Red Bull and Max Verstappen? And again, in my humble opinion, no. They should not be, because there is one thing that they need to understand right now. Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, they were part of the most dominant era in Formula 1. The partnership dominated the sport for 7 years. That is something that is unprecedented and has never happened in the sport. Red Bull has been dominating for 18 odd months right now. Whatever the kind of records they are setting, they are impressive, and for that particular period, it certainly looks good. But what Mercedes and Toto Wolff essentially did during a 7-year period is still unparalleled in the sport. You want to look at the kind of records that Lewis Hamilton has in his career, just go to Wikipedia, by the way, a site that Toto Wolff does not like. Just go to the website and go through the entire list of the kind of accolades that Lewis Hamilton has collected in his career. And once you look at them and you marvel at the kind of achievements that he has nothing to be insecure about. The man has achieved everything that is to be achieved in Formula 1. Most titles, most race wins, most pole positions. In my view, it's hard to see those records even get eclipsed or even someone reaching close to it. These are the records that Lewis Hamilton has. And this is where I think somewhere down the line, he does not even need to feel insecure. I think this is also where Lewis needs to take a lesson from former legends like Michael Schumacher or maybe even Sebastian Vettel as well. When Michael Schumacher lost out to Fernando Alonso in 2005 and 2006, he did not come out and make statements similar to these. And even when Michael was back in 2010, 2011, 2012, and he was not in the spotlight while Vettel, Alonso and Hamilton were doing all the winning, Michael did not make any comments, any disparaging comments towards these drivers. No, he did not. He appreciated them, and he also acknowledged that these drivers are doing a brilliant job. The more recent example, and someone that Lewis truly should take a cue from, was Sebastian Vettel, because when the turbo hybrid era began, Sebastian Vettel, in terms of records and achievements, was heads and shoulders above everyone, including Lewis. He had 4 world championships, and the records that he actually had, Lewis and even Fernando Alonso were not even close to it. However, as the time elapsed and Lewis eclipsed Vettel's records, Vettel was the first man to congratulate him, and Vettel was the first man to put him over, and that is something that any gracious champion would do. And that is something that Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes need to do right now. Sure, you have your rivalry, sure, everything is there in place, but have some grace, because at the end of the day, if the respect is gone from the sport, especially at such high moments, then what's the point of it all? The sportsman spirit gets killed in these moments. And I'm pretty sure a driver of the caliber and of the character of Lewis will actually look back and actually think that maybe the comments were out of line, and maybe he might come back and say something better. So yes, these were my views regarding the whole situation. I'm sorry it's a bit long video. Do let me know what do you guys think. Drop your views in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.